Today, homosexuality is generally accepted in society. Huge leaps have been made culturally in order to normalize homosexuality. In 2015, gay marriage was officially legalized throughout the United States and, just this year, also throughout Australia. The LGBT+ community has been fueling rapid change all over the world for years. Annual gay pride parades are held globally in the United States, Costa Rica, Mexico, France, South Africa, Brazil, and many other countries. The U.S. government has further legitimized the community with dedicated national monuments specifically in their honor. In fact, the Stonewall Inn was one such monument dedicated to the gay community due to being where the LGBT+ community galvanized and fought back against oppression. Not long ago, homosexuality was thought to be an evil of society.
There may be some in this auditorium. There may be some here today that will be homosexual in the future. There are a lot of kids here. There may be some girls that'll turn lesbian. We don't know. But it's serious. Don't kid yourselves about it. They can be anywhere. They can be judges, lawyers. We ought to know we've arrested all of them.
Not only has it been shamed on the religious front, society at large thought homosexuality was immoral and grotesque. For reference to how homosexuals were perceived, it was a commonly held belief that homosexuals were the main aggressors of child molestation. The LGBT+ community hardly existed and yet was outright hated by the public. There were no compromises for the LGBT+ community, only a world of oppression. The 1950s are considered amongst the most conservative era in the 20th century. And as part of the 1950s, the country was actively combating the spread of communism during the period of political tension known as Red Scare. A subsection of this political turmoil was the Lavender Scare. The Lavender Scare itself was when the federal and state governments investigated and fired thousands of employees suspected to be gay or lesbian. This was done with the claim of suspected homosexuals being a security risk, as it was thought that these individuals were more susceptible to Soviet blackmail. The persecution of the gay community continued long after the Lavender Scare. In 1968, homosexuality was officially deemed a mental illness by American Psychiatric Association. This was an era when coming out as gay was the worst possible thing to happen to you. Oftentimes, being outed resulted in anything ranging from suicide, flat-out imprisonment, becoming unemployable, being fined, chemical castration, or even being sent to a camp specializing in conversion therapy. Conversion therapy used techniques that were extreme enough to be considered torture. In most cases, conversion therapy involved inflicting electric shock to the victim's genitals or forcing them to ingest the vomit-inducing drugs while displaying nude pictures of the same sex. Finally, when the victim could no longer bear the torture, naked pictures of the opposite sex would be shown without the abuse. With blatant disregard for the victim's well-being, this abuse would continue until the practitioner was content with the results. Sometimes, these inhumane practices would end with sending the patient out on a so-called date with a young nurse as a final test. Horrifically, conversion therapists boasted of a 58% cure rate.
Conversion therapy was the tamest of what institutions did to their victims. In rare instances, physicians would repeatedly rape lesbian women with the pretension of this turning the woman straight. This happened so often it earned a name: corrective rape. Corrective rape is now a hate crime, yet only half a century ago this was a legal practice. Worse still, lobotomies were an alternative method to trying to cure homosexuality. Lobotomies consist of removing the connections to and from the prefrontal cortex in the brain. This resulted in leaving many of those subjected severely disabled for the rest of their lives. They became shells of their former self. With so much to lose, most homosexuals flocked to the city. In the city, they could hide amongst the crowds. Most major metropolitan areas allowed the LGBT+ communities to exist, but only so long as they kept out of sight. The LGBT+ community could avoid most gross violations of their constitutional and humanitarian rights by sticking to this unspoken compromise. Yet, individuals were still targeted. Public displays of homosexual affection ended in arrests, wealthy gay men were blackmailed over their sexuality. In the end, being gay was still a crime. Due to their inability to publicly gather and be themselves, the LGBT community flourished around gay bars. Gay bars were many of their safe havens, and here, although to a small degree, they were able to be themselves. The shady mafia-run gay bars, you were allowed to be anything. Being gay, transgender, or dressing in drag was acceptable. Gay bars were the place to be a member of the LGBT community, and many ostracized minorities spent their nights in the shallow comfort of the gay bars. Most, if not all, gay bars were mafia-run and solely for profits. In New York, the most popular hotspot for gay culture was the Stonewall Inn. The Stonewall was one of many gay bars the mob ran in the 1960s. The mob ran these establishments solely for profit, and this was an open secret. Like all gay bars, the Stonewall had understanding with the police. The Stonewall was raided frequently, but the establishment was to be tipped off when the raid would occur. This allowed the management to protect itself, alert patrons, and minimize the number of arrests and inventory loss. In turn, police would earn a hefty sum for their cooperation. Bribing the police made most raids nominal, though police would raid the establishment, arrest whoever was inside lacking identification, and fine the Stonewall for serving liquor without a license. And then the very next night, the Stonewall would be back to being a haven of gay culture. When there was no raid scheduled, the Stonewall was a very active and lively club. The relative safety to be themselves was more than worth the exuberant pricing of everything inside.
Yet, this compromise only went so far. On June 28, 1969, the Stonewall was hosting its regulars and the party was in full swing. It was 1:20 a.m., now Saturday. Some plainly dressed men were at the entrance, creating confusion. It was a police raid, unusually late and without warning. The few who heard the police enter tried to escape, but the police had already barred the windows and secured the doors in the back bathroom. Instead, everyone in the Stonewall was being ordered to line up and produce identification in order to avoid being arrested. This was their only way out of the Stonewall. Anyone dressed as a woman was being lined up separately in order to undress in the bathroom for verification of their sex, and men caught dressed as a woman would be immediately arrested. And yet those dressed as a woman, regardless of their sex, refused. The situation worsened when police sexually assaulted several lesbians under the pretense of imprisonment procedure. With a sense of discomfort being quite palpable, those not under arrest were ordered to leave the bar. Those under arrest had to remain inside until patrol wagons arrived on scene to take both the arrested patrons and the bootleg liquor to the police station. However, instead of fleeing from the scene, those not arrested stayed just outside the Stonewall storefront. The police raid had amassed great attention already, and the accompanying crowd was curious. Within minutes, an estimated several hundred gathered in the streets watching the police now arrest the management and staff of the Stonewall. Spectators cheered them on, some even shouting, "Gay power." A collection of bystanders joined in singing, "We Shall Overcome," which would go on to become the anthem of the civil rights movement. This led to the police officers feeling rather uncomfortable. Perhaps because of their bigotry or maybe the hostility in the air, police officers shoved a transvestite out of their path. She paid the favor back in full by hitting the officer in the head with her purse. The author Edmund White described the night quite simply. Everyone's restless, angry, and high-spirited. No one has a slogan, no one even has an attitude, but something's brewing. The hostility became substance as the crowd threw pennies at the arriving patrol wagons. Rumor that the patrons inside the Stonewall were being beaten by the police spread, leading to beer bottles both full and empty also being thrown. Police tried to hurry the arrested into the wagons before the situation turned worse. As they were bringing a handcuffed woman into the patrol wagon, she fought bitterly. Cursing and shouting, she thwarted efforts of recapture for over 10 minutes. When finally 4 men got her under control again, she looked at the bystanders and shouted at them, "Why don't you guys do something?" And with that, violence exploded. Bystanders started to stir, and police responded by trying to contain them. The police only managed to anger the crowd more when they knocked over some bystanders in the process. Galvanized bystanders turned into rioters and lashed out. They began making an effort to police wagons and slash their tires. Police fled the scene, and their wagons sped away on the new flats. Some 500 people were gathered, outnumbering the police. Street urchins, drag queens, anti-war protesters, gay individuals, and really anyone else who fit the broad umbrella of an excluded minority was there. Police were frightened, and with nowhere else to go, the remaining officers fled into the Stonewall Inn. Garbage cans, garbage, bottles, rocks, bricks, and the like were hurled at the building, breaking windows. Burning garbage followed, thrown through the broken glass. Panicked, the police tried to use a fire hose to subdue the crowd. But the fire hose lacked water pressure, and their failed attempt only encouraged them further. The police drew their weapons and threatened to shoot as violence worsened. Lighter fluid spewed into the Stonewall was lit, and the police took aim as a result. Sirens echoed through the streets as firefighters and ambulances came onto the scene. For the next 45 minutes, chaos would ensue across the street until the tactical police force in New York came onto the scene. The police were angry, and this anti-riot unit would help end it. The police would chase the rioters through the crooked streets, finding themselves mostly evaded. Yet by 4 a.m., the streets cleared, only for another riot to occur the following night.
These riots changed everything. The LGBT+ community had fought back for the first time. Long had they suffered, and their grievances aired for the world to see. They would no longer live on the fringes of society. They would not hide any longer. They were done with these half-baked compromises with an abusive public, and their pushback engendered a force of change. The new movement for equality was met with news coverage fervently against the rioters. Even so, the gay community organized and pushed an agenda of equality into the nation's focus.